All right, welcome into Mississippi State Live here in the voice of college football. Andrew Miller here on a Monday evening. A little bit of a different setup for me. I'm in a different recording space right now, and probably be the recording space for the near future. So we'll get used to it. Still going to get that figured out. But yeah, glad to be back here on the show. Thursday night, I guess, was our last show. Not much to talk about on that one, but found some stuff to get into for this. So looking forward to another stream. Appreciate everyone for tuning in. If you haven't already, please leave us a like on the video. Subscribe to the channel and have those notifications turned on so you do know when we do go live. And if you can tell all the Bulldog fans in your life about what we're doing here at Mississippi State Live, get the subscriber numbers up, get the stream numbers up, all that great stuff. We would certainly appreciate that. Wanted to start getting into some positional preview talk. It's kind of at that point where if you do one or even two of these a week, spring practices are going to be right up on you. So we're going to start with one. We're talking about the Bulldog quarterbacks tonight, obviously highlighting Kamario Taylor more than anything else, but also looking at the quarterback room as a whole, maybe trying to get an idea of where that might stack up within the SEC. Could end up being a pretty solid group for the Bulldogs overall. And then going to take a look at some returning production numbers. A few of us have been sharing this around on X, but there's Dog Stats, Speakeasy Sports, was doing some really good stuff with returning production numbers across college football as a whole. And looks like we got those numbers at a place now where start to look at where Mississippi State stands within the SEC and get an idea of the type of production coming back in Starkville, at least their overall numbers going into the next season and just where they stand in different positions. So should be some fun stuff to get into tonight. But we want to start with positional previews. And again, it's the time to start getting into looking at this roster. And I know we've kind of already done that. We did our depth chart projection already for the pre-spring. We've looked at the transfer class, graded the portal class, all that kind of stuff. But taking a look at each individual position group, where you stand in that room, and you start with the quarterback position. And, you know, I don't think there has ever been more hype and excitement around a single player in Starkville who has yet to become a full-time starter than there is around Kamario Taylor right now. And I know he got a couple starts at the end of last season, but going into the year knowing he's the guy, you know, there was a lot of excitement around Dak, obviously going from 2013 to 2014. But at that point, Dak had started like half of the 2013 season as it is. Obviously, you know, we knew what we were getting with him. We didn't see him taking the step forward that he did, and it ended up being an awesome year. Will in the chat. Yo, what's up, Will? Glad to have you here. Ended up being a huge year, but you kind of knew what you were getting with Dak Prescott at that point. And we know a little bit of what we're getting with Kamario Taylor, but there's still this almost lore around him at this point because you're talking about a guy that is the highest rated quarterback signee in program history. And on top of that, he's a Mississippi State guy through and through. You know, Omar Connor's nephew grew up 30 minutes down the road playing for Noxubee County in Macon. A guy who committed to Mississippi State early on before Jeff Lebby was the coach, stayed on with Jeff Lebby despite Georgia, Texas A&M pushing for him, wanted to be a Bulldog, an Elite 11 finalist, a guy that some services, I think On 3 came close to giving him a 5th star. Didn't quite get there, but they had him at one point as the number 30 prospect in the country by their own metrics. And I know they ended up pushing him down when it was all said and done. But both On 3 and 247 take the approach of if you're a top 32 player in the country, you're a 5-star by their metrics. And again, I know he didn't finish there, ends up being the consensus 4-star player that he was. State's never had a guy like that come onto campus. And you saw it in the spring. It's just different. State's had the 4 stars in the past. They've signed quite a few 4-star quarterbacks over the years. Almost all of them have been guys that you look at and like, yeah, very talented, could play early, could contribute early, but, you know, probably a guy that's a few years away from being a real high-level player within the SEC. And not to put those expectations on Kamario. Kamario comes in with a talent profile that kind of does put those expectations on that if he hits that ceiling, you're talking about a guy that could be one of the top quarterbacks in the SEC and one of the top quarterbacks in college football. A guy who is 6'4", 230 pounds, that has the arm strength that he does with the flick of the wrist, launching at 50 yards downfield, flat-footed. The athleticism that he does, where it's the combination of breakaway speed in the open field, power to run between the tackles and breaking through contact, and then also the elusiveness to make guys miss, both in terms of avoiding pressure, avoiding tacklers in the open field. I have not seen State have a quarterback move like that. Andre Ware in the bowl game made the comparison to Vince Young, which Vince Young's before my time. So I didn't see Vince Young in college. I've seen the highlights. Obviously, I know the type of player that he was. Like that's rare air. For me, kind of reminiscent a little bit of like a Lamar Jackson in terms of the way he moves in the open field, but he also has a power that I think Lamar doesn't have. I don't want to throw around the Cam Newton comparison to this point, but in terms of a guy who had the all-around skill set, I mean, the way Kamario runs, you could probably compare a little bit to Cam. But he might even be a little bit more elusive than Cam. Like Cam had legit speed, but Cam was also more of a power runner. For guys at Mississippi State, Dak and Fitz were more power runners. Now, Fitz early in his year obviously we saw the long touchdown runs that he had at State, which he kind of lost that after the injury. But he was still a little bit more power. And he also wasn't a make-you-miss quarterback. He was sort of going to run you over. Kamario does a little bit of all. And I don't want to just focus on the running element of all of it, because the passing element you think has the ability to be there too. He throws it on a rope. And when he is in rhythm, can just set fire, throw to my first read, it's there. Which for a guy of his age, as a true freshman coming in last season, that's kind of the expectation. You're not necessarily expecting a ton of big boy quarterbacking in the pocket, which I think he does have the ability to do. And he has shown the ability to work through his reads, get through his checkdowns. Definitely has to work on that accuracy. That's something that's going to come with more time, come with more reps in that short to intermediate part of the field. But he has the ability to hit every throw that he's going to be asked to hit within this offense. He has the arm strength and arm talent to hit any throw you could ask of him if he can get the accuracy part of it down, but that's going to come. And I know I'm talking a little bit as if we haven't seen this guy. We've now seen him in multiple games for Mississippi State. We've seen him get extensive playing time. I guess it would average out to about 4 games worth of action if you put it all together for him. Getting maybe 3.5. Heavy work in the second half against Arkansas, heavy work in the second half against Georgia, good bit of action against Missouri, and then obviously getting the starts against Ole Miss and Wake Forest in the bowl game. And I was going to say playing the entirety. Obviously, he went down. You had Luke Kromenhoek come in for a bit against Wake Forest. This chair keeps hitting against this wall, and it's annoying the crap out of me. We've seen it, but what does he look like when he goes through an entire offseason as the guy for Mississippi State at quarterback? That's where there's so much excitement that he gets this whole offseason to work with these guys as QB1. And he's got that year under his belt. And now it's like, okay, you can fully unleash the talent that is Kamario Taylor. You have fully built the offense around him. Whatever Jeff Lebby plans schematically this year as the basis of his offense, Kamario Taylor is the focal point of that. Obviously, they had a package for Kamario, and I'm sure they expounded upon that package when he became a starter in the Egg Bowl and in the bowl game. But in terms of going through, okay, what is our offseason install? What are we putting in? And the base offense is not going to change, but how they structure things entirely, there's stuff that they were repping for Blake Shapen that they're not going to be repping for Kamario Taylor and vice versa. It is all geared towards he is QB1. We are building this thing around him. So there's a lot of excitement around the opportunity there. Now, of course, it comes down to the pieces you put around him, and it comes down to his maturation as well and his development. And how much of that does he show over the course of the offseason going into next year? But there's some really high potential. And the reason there is this hype and excitement, everything from highest rated QB we've had, he is a lifelong Bulldog, all of that wonderful stuff. State's never had a quarterback like this. They've never had a guy that you look at and say, if he hits his talent ceiling, he will be one of the very best quarterbacks in college football. Dak became a guy like that. Dak became a great college QB, and all SEC, all American caliber college quarterback. Dak Prescott became that. Dak Prescott was also a low 3-star coming out of high school in Houghton, Louisiana, that other programs, notably LSU, thought should be playing tight end at the next level. That Dan Mullen looked at and said, I can make that guy work, and we can develop and coach him up. And you saw Dak's development year after year after year. And, Dak did not play as a true freshman in 2011. took his red shirt, and that was also before red shirts could get on the field. Then in 2012, he kind of became what you saw with Kamario this year as that package quarterback as a redshirt freshman, where 3rd and short, 4th and short, goal line, will put Dak in for a few plays, let him plunge ahead. And he showed some flashes there. You saw, okay, this guy could be something. He didn't show you anything in that redshirt freshman season to make you think this guy is the future face of Bulldog football. It's, hey, this guy could be the quarterback down the line. Obviously, 2013, he gets thrust into action very early with Tyler Russell getting injured. And he kind of showed, okay, he's taking a big step forward. Like, this guy's a gamer. This guy's a playmaker. And he is a leader and ends up taking over that team. And then you see the step forward to 2014, 2015, the further maturation. It was a process with Dak. There's going to be a process with Kamario Taylor. I'm not suggesting that he is anywhere near a finished product, but what I'm saying is that the Kamario Taylor you see on the field right now is ahead of where Dak Prescott was to that point. Granted, State's had other quarterbacks come in that were technically ahead of Dak to that point and didn't amount to anything. But those guys weren't getting on the field the way the Kamario was. So you've got quite the talent ceiling that if he is able to hit upon that, you're going to see something special. And that gives you a ton of excitement about what this quarterback room looks like. And it gives you a ton of excitement going into spring, especially that it appears that the procedure that he had to have done after the bowl game, thank God you avoid serious injury in that bowl game. He's come out of it. I know they just did the video of him and his brother, which, that's cool that he gets to play with his brother now, walking across the field. Looks like he's walking fine. I don't know if he started to partake in any sort of workouts or anything to this point, but he's going to be full go for spring. He's going to get these spring practices. And I'm hoping, spring game, if I can be in attendance, I'll be in attendance, but I would love for this thing to be televised so that we can have it on tape and have a full record of like Kamario Taylor as MSU's QB in the spring. What does that look like? How much further along has he come just in these last few months, which I guess, look, rehabbing from, again, that surgery, maybe he hasn't gotten to take too big of a step forward, but it's more reps. It's more time in the offense for him. And what does he do throughout the spring? In the 15 practices leading up to the spring game, there's going to be a lot of excitement to get to see that. And, I've kind of done a full breakdown here as if we're going into the season, but it's going to be really fun to look at this QB room knowing you've got a guy that if he hits his potential could be one of the SEC's best. And I know various quarterback rankings have come out. SEC Unfiltered put out theirs. SEC Mike put out his. And Kamario's kind of been ranking outside the top 10, and State fans have taken issue with that. I personally don't have a problem with it just because I understand he is still largely an unknown commodity. We've seen a couple games. We know what the ceiling is. If you don't want to put him ahead of guys who are more established players in the SEC, I don't have an issue with that. But I think of the teams where it's going to be a new starter, I think you've got to put him up at the top of that list, in my opinion. I guess somebody may argue like an Austin Simmons going to Missouri, where he is at is similar to, or where Kamario is at is similar to where Austin Simmons was going into this past season. So you could argue those one way or another. I know there's all sort of hype around Keelan Russell. If he is going to be the guy at Alabama, what could he be? But, whoever's stepping in at Tennessee, whoever's Kenny Minchie at Kentucky, I don't think you can put those guys ahead of Kamario Taylor to this point. And the ceiling, again, is there for Taylor that if we end the year and he's a top 5 quarterback in the SEC, I don't think any of us are surprised. Was that the ankle surgery? Yeah, so he did have to undergo, and I'm sorry, I am going to adjust this chair briefly. He did have to undergo a minor procedure for the injury, lower leg, whatever it was specifically. But it was nothing serious. It was something they knew they'd be able to handle, and it wouldn't be a long recovery. And sure enough, the expectation is that he's going to be full go for spring. And I think he's going to be ready to go whenever they start spring practice here in the next couple of weeks. I think the date was around like March 17th was when I know Thunder and Lightning, I guess they had somebody source them on. It was probably going to be March 17th starting. So about a month out until spring practice. He should be fully ready to go at that point. But yeah, the ceiling is there for State to have one of the top quarterbacks in the conference. And that's a great place to be because of, can he carry the offense? And look, that's a lot to put on the plate of a young guy. And I do think it's worth noting, look, you've had quarterbacks in the recent years in the SEC, and Nico Iamaleava and Jackson Arnold, who were these high-profile QBs coming out of high school as true freshmen, got on the field, made starts, showed a lot of flashes that had people going into the next season saying, that guy is one of the very best quarterbacks in the SEC. Football season arrives and it didn't pan out for him. They didn't have the year that they wanted to have. Those guys with higher talent profiles coming out than what Kamario had. And both of those guys, for what it's worth, in this offensive system that you were running under Jeff Lebby. So you don't want to put too much on his plate. I'm also not saying that he's going to flop in the way that those guys are. You don't want to put too much on his plate, though. You want to understand, like, you've got to put the right pieces around. Because part of the problem, Nico, I can't say much. He had a 1,500-yard rusher alongside him, and their receiving talent was not great. And also, I think Heupel didn't do enough for them offensively with the way he called it that year. But Nico also just missed a lot. He also had a great defense. He wasn't like he was having to lift up the defense. Arnold, he also had a great defense. Arnold had 0 weapons and 0 offensive line. He was kind of destined to fail, and Seth Luttrell as a play caller just did him no favors at all. Obviously, we've now seen since that Arnold has his own problems even further as a QB, but I think with Jeff Lebby and a healthier offensive line running things in 2024 at Oklahoma, maybe Arnold has a better year. To that point, State's got to get offensive line figured out. If you don't put the protection in front of him, what is it going to be? I think they've got the skill talent. I think the receiving core is there for him to have plenty of weapons to thrive. Ant Evans coming back is huge. Getting Marquise Johnson out of Missouri, I think, is huge. Can Zion Ragens take a step forward? I think Frisco McGee is a guy people are very excited for after what he showed in the bowl game. Does Aiden Williams finally put it together? You've got some pieces there in the receiving core. You have Fluff Bothwell coming back. And I think that's a good compliment in the run game and a couple other younger guys that are very talented as well. It's all going to come down to offensive line. Can you protect him? And if you can protect him, he's got to have a chance to have a really, really big year. Elsewhere in the quarterback room, this is a pretty well-rounded room as a whole because you bring in 2 transfers to give you a couple options at depth in the room. Notably, A.J. Swan coming over from Vanderbilt, a guy that coming from App State, started his career at Vanderbilt, has a lot of experience in the SEC, spent 3 seasons as an SEC quarterback, 2 at Vanderbilt, 1 at LSU. Now, didn't play when he was in Baton Rouge, maybe got in a couple games for a few snaps, but largely did not play. Spent 2 years at Vanderbilt, mostly as the starter. I know he battled injuries, but I believe his second year there, every game he was healthy, he was the starter. And look, was an up-and-down player, was not a guy who was a great SEC quarterback or great college quarterback, but had some big performances for Vanderbilt as well. Had some times where he played well enough to show you some flashes. And now, coming off a year at App State where, again, was up and down, did not have the type of year that he would have liked, got injured again, but still showed some of those flashes. And the big thing with Swan is you've got the in-game experience. He has been around college football. He has gone and played in difficult environments. He has gone up against SEC defenses before. He's played a lot of football. If something happens and you have to go to a backup quarterback for whatever reason, having a guy who has been there and done that, I think, is the best thing you could have asked for. We talked about this a lot with Mississippi State when it came to what were they going to be looking for in the QB room, in the portal. You knew your options were going to be limited. You were not going to go out and get a guy with a super high talent ceiling. I guess we'll talk about Rashada in a second. If you want to still argue he has that we can see. But it was going to be tough, right? The guy where it's one last ride, well, that's going to be tough because those guys know that their career's about over. I want to go someplace I can close out my career playing. Young talent, those guys look at Kamario Taylor and would say, well, why would I go there when he's going to be the guy for the next 3 years or so? So it was going to be kind of slim pickings. A.J. Swan was the exact type of player that we looked at, and we pointed him out on this show. I still think it's hilarious that I was going live on the show just, all right, who are the quarterbacks in the portal? It's like, oh, A.J. Swan. Like, that's a guy. I'm not saying it's going to be A.J. Swan, but that's the type of guy that I see State going after. They end up getting A.J. Swan. If you had to turn to him and you put him into a game, I think he is someone who can manage the game. Be a game manager, but that's fine. Is he going to give you anything from an athleticism standpoint? No, not really. Is he crazy talented as a passer? Not really. Do you think he can go in and if you had to start him a game, could he keep the ship afloat and do what he is asked to in the offense? I think that's possible, which is ultimately what you are looking for out of your backup quarterback. The fact you are not having to turn it over to a young guy who's not been in that spot before is beneficial for you. The fact that you are able to get a guy who has gotten the game action and will have done it all before, that's about as good as you can ask for. And he can also be someone Kamario can lean on a little bit. And like Kamario can okay, how'd you handle this? How'd you handle this? Like he can give him some advice here or there on navigating the waters as a quarterback in college football in the SEC. So it's a good voice to have in the room, a good piece. Jaden Rashada gives you the higher upside option where, look, at this point, it's hard to call Rashada anything other than a bust. I don't put it all on him the way things have played out. Obviously, getting injured at Arizona State did not help matters for him at all. Doesn't beat out Sam Leavitt. I guess I don't remember when he transferred out at that point, but I guess kind of felt it was going to be best to go. The coaching staff was ready to go in another direction. They brought Leavitt in. He showed some flashes though as a true freshman at Arizona State when he was healthy. Obviously, takes the redshirt year at Georgia. Sac State did not work out for him. He didn't play well, lost the job, also was battling an injury. And I think he feels more like a bust because of the NIL side of it, that he was one of the first big NIL stories in college football that, he flips from Miami to Florida for this $9.5 million deal that doesn't come through and then hits the portal because gets released of his letter of intent and hits the portal because of that. And anytime you have a move like that, you're a high-profile quarterback coming out and money is what's being discussed, you're not going to be a popular figure in the eyes of the college football public. And then you had the lawsuit against Billy Napier. The fact of the matter is, he's a guy that was still very talented coming out of high school that Jeff Lebby thought very highly of. Tried to recruit him on multiple occasions. As I've said before, he's not a great athlete. It's not like you're talking about a guy that could step in and run the same offense that you're going to run with Kamario. But is he a guy that you could do a few design QB runs with, could ask to scramble every now and then and give you more than you're going to get out of A.J. Swan? Yes. Does he have more arm talent than you're getting out of A.J. Swan? Yes. He has the ability to make the throws that you want to see. If he comes in and could settle in and have a big spring, and I'm going to be very interested to watch him in the spring because of that, maybe you see something there. And no, he's not coming in to compete for the job. It is Kamario Taylor's job through and through. But if Kamario goes down and you had to turn it over to somebody, maybe Rashada shows you something this offseason that makes you think he's still got something. He still has some ability. The fact that you've given yourself that option where there's still some upside at a backup quarterback spot, and he's got some experience. Again, he made 3 starts at Arizona State. He's been in college football going into his 4th year now. I think only got 1 or 2 starts at Sac State. So it's not like you're talking about a guy with extensive game experience, but he's played some and he's been around college football a long enough time at this point. You think he could handle some of the pressure of that. It's another good addition to the room. Give yourself some options. Last guy, Brody McWhorter comes in as a true freshman, 3-star prospect, bunch of offers coming out. I know, West Virginia, Auburn, with sort of the other schools you were hearing about with his recruitment. Plenty of talent. The kid can move. The kid, I wouldn't say he's like a special arm, but he can make the throws that you need him to, but a good athlete and a guy who is clearly projected as a power conference level quarterback moving forward. Is he ever going to be the guy at Mississippi State long term? I guess you should never say never, because I think we assume it's going to be Kamario. You never know what's going to happen in college football. His chances are probably pretty slim, but if that's your number 4 quarterback on the roster going into this year, that's a great place to be in. And the way I look at it is, like Michael Van Buren was a higher profile player coming out, but Van Buren wasn't like super high, more highly rated. I could be speaking completely off base there. I don't know where they were ranked nationally, but I believe they were both similar prospects from an overall 3-star. Van Buren had a 4-star by some metrics. I think Rivals gave McWhorter a 4-star though. So they were similar profile quarterbacks coming out. And you had to play Van Buren as a true freshman. And he played well. He handled that fine. You didn't want to have to do that. You've given yourself the ability to not have to do that this year. You gave yourself the option to not have to do it last year. Just the true freshman was so talented that that's what you wanted to do when you went away from Blake. But having more veteran guys in the room is the best thing. So, look, I think State's put together a good room here. Obviously, Kamario has the ability to be one of the top QBs in the conference. Where does the room rank? Just looking at here, College Football News actually put him as the number 4 room, number 5 room in the SEC, which that was before they knew Trinidad was coming back. So I guess you would have him 6th. I don't know that I would have him that high. I do think there's other rooms with higher upside. But there is a good mix that State has between super high ceiling, super talented young guy, solid, steady veteran, intriguing backup option, decent young freshman. This is a good quarterback room. It's a well-rounded quarterback room. It's frankly probably on par with where you were at last year in terms of the overall talent, if not a little bit better with some of the guys that you've brought in. So Lovey's done a good job with this group. You got a good group at quarterback. I feel confident Mississippi State's going to get better quarterback play going into next season. I guess we'll figure out more about that going through the spring. But as it stands right now, this is a good group on paper. What are they going to put around them? That's kind of the big question. All right, let's do some returning production talk for Mississippi State. Let me see if I can get this pulled up with here we go. Let me make sure that's showing. Okay. So this is from Dog Stats, Speakeasy Sports. And again, we shared some of this stuff previously, not here on the channel, but over on Twitter, talking about returning production within the SEC. Really cool database with all the rosters updated. Been some updates that have been had to made for a few places, so some of this could still be adjusted as we go further into the offseason. Obviously, keeping track of every single team is difficult, and then sometimes data just doesn't like to transfer over. Well, I think that was something that happened with one of State's guys. Is like he tried to add him in, and it just went to the wrong place. But State's numbers should be accurate at this point. And I thought I would just go through. We'll look at offense and defense, where they stand on some of the bigger returning production numbers. And offensive line, and I guess they've kind of fallen back down again because I believe they were up to 10 previously. Mississippi State, number 13 in the SEC in terms of returning offensive line snaps, with about 4,800 coming back. South Carolina leading the way with over 10,300, by a wide margin. Carolina lost like 9 linemen to the portal, and yet is leading the SEC in returning offensive line snaps because the portal class they brought in, they added a lot of guys that have played a whole lot of football, which I think is a smart move. It's an approach I think more teams should try to employ moving forward. But for Mississippi State, you don't have a ton of experience in this group, road to the SEC. Cannon Boone and DJ Chester have both played a pretty solid number of reps. Both of them essentially have like 1 year worth of starting and then another year of getting decent backup reps. Outside of that, Brandon Snee has played a lot, but he's played a lot at lower levels. So how does that translate up in terms of FBS snaps? I guess that's another question. But Miles McVay, has not played a ton. Got some valuable reps last year for North Carolina, but was not a starter, and really saw more action late in the season. LJ Perdome not played a lot. Blake Steen has played a lot, and that's a guy whose numbers are going to help you out here. But it's not a ton of experience for Mississippi State on the offensive line, and that's one of the things that is a little bit concerning when you talk about that group. Is you don't have an offensive line, and let me make sure I'm scrolled down so you guys can see that. You don't have an offensive line that's just loaded with a bunch of guys that have played a whole lot of football, which I think probably would have been the best course of action for State in terms of filling out that room. We've talked about it a lot. They added a lot of guys who have higher upside, higher ceilings. It's a lot of young guys where, hey, if it clicks for Mario Nash and for Tyler Miller, those are guys that could be really, really good players for State down the line. But they haven't gotten there quite yet. So what are you getting out of this group moving forward, or for 2026 rather? It's kind of still a question what that's ultimately going to be, because you just don't have a ton of guys who have played a bunch. I think Cannon Boone and Chester are both solid SEC starters. If you get Chester, playing guard, which is where I think he's going to be. I think Blake Steen is probably a solid power conference level starter. Okay. But is he going to play guard or tackle? And missing last year with injury, how does that impact him? Is Miles McVay ready for that next step? I think he showed some good potential late in the season, a guy that can probably be a solid starter, but he just doesn't have the reps. And O-line reps is such a big part of it. The reason the production number here is O-line snaps, one, that's kind of how you have to judge it. They don't really have a lot of counting stats for offensive line. But generally speaking, the best performing offensive lines are the groups that have guys that have played a whole lot of football, because it is a position where so much of what you do comes down to how you play as a unit. It comes down to understanding, when I get this front across from me, here's how I have to handle it. When I get this pressure look from a defense, this stunt, this is how I have to handle it. And when I'm working next to this guy, okay, we need to double team and then climb to the second level to this guy. There's so much that comes together for O-line play. It's not as simple as be bigger, faster, stronger than the guy across from you, where some positions you just operate in space and you can kind of just say, be the best athlete, go win. O-line, that continuity together matters a lot. It's tough to get that continuity in this era where guys transfer so much, which is why the best thing that you can have going for you is having a lot of guys in the room who've played a lot of football. But State's kind of not there. So that's going to be interesting. They are very clearly looking at about 5 guys that they are really going to need to play well for them in all likelihood. Passing yards, State's number 7. You can thank Jaden Rashada for much of that. That's where Rashada really leads the way. But that's good for State. I think that is a sign of the depth of the quarterback room that you have. That it's a new starter at quarterback, but you still have a lot of production in the QB room from a passing standpoint. Number 6 in passing touchdowns with 37. You've got a good bit of production because you've got guys who have played a lot of football in that room. So that is a good sign for what you have behind Kamario Taylor, that you are not putting it all on him, that you just have nobody else that you could possibly lean on. And again, Kamario is going to be the guy at quarterback, but again, if Kamario goes down, you have solid options to turn to. Obviously, that's what we're just talking about. And you also have guys who have been around the sport that Kamario can lean on a little bit as he learns and as he grows in that spot. From a rushing yardage standpoint, down at number 10, again, this is one where a lot of it is Fluff Bothwell. A lot of it's Kamario, to be honest. But it's heavily based around a couple of guys, because you don't have a ton of experience in that room outside of your top guy and Fluff. And at this point, look, Fluff, 3rd-year college football, been a very productive running back at this point in his career. You know what you got there. But after him, Xavier Gaden's a guy who has shown flashes. There's a lot of excitement for what Gaden can ultimately be. He hasn't quite shown it yet as a guy that you can truly count on. Is he going to take that step forward? Colin Wilson hasn't really gotten on the field. So it's a couple freshmen that you're looking at and how they step in. Now, look, rushing yards returning, a lot of times rushing offense can be a product of scheme more so than talent. That's why teams sort of devalue running back, which does seem to be changing. To be fair, we are moving back to where running backs matter once again. So don't let me get caught behind in a purely analytical way of looking at it. I'm not too worried about where they're at from a rushing standpoint, but look, sure, they're not super high in that. And then rush touchdown 8th with 22. Receiving targets, I think this is an interesting one, and you kind of see some inexperience once again. And it's interesting because we feel good about this group, but Mississippi State is 12th in the SEC with 356 receiving targets. And keep in mind, pretty much all of those, not all of them, but a lot of those are for Aiden Williams. God. Anthony Evans last season. Because keep in mind, he did not play much at Georgia his first couple of years. Then last year becomes a guy who catches like 80 passes for the Bulldogs, was heavily involved. Aiden Williams has played a good bit at this point. Marquise Johnson's been kind of heavily involved. So I think you've got a couple guys, but you need talent to step up at receiver. You don't have a super proven receiving room. You have a proven leader, though, that I think you feel good about. You've got a guy that, in Marquise Johnson, who I would say is a proven player in the extent that when he has gotten opportunities, he's taken advantage of them. He just didn't get enough opportunities at Missouri, thanks to the quarterback play that he was dealing with. But he's not been a featured player yet. I think you feel comfortable here, though, as well. And looking at receiving yards, State's actually down at 13th at just under 3,000 yards. Receiving touchdowns, 14th in the league with 16. You know, there's not a ton of returning production in the room, but there was not a ton of returning production at wide receiver last year. There was practically none. And that group still turned out being even better. I think you feel good about the skill talent at State, right? The numbers where they're at don't really worry me. I think State's got guys that within this system are going to thrive from a skill position standpoint, even if there's not a ton of experience across the board at those spots. O-line is what scares me. That is what's scared me previously. That's what's going to continue to scare me until I'm given a reason to believe otherwise. I'm going to need to see that room put something together. Going over to the defensive side of the ball and looking at overall defensive snaps, this is where State's in a very interesting spot. And this is the one that I think is most important to me. State has close to 13,000 returning snaps on defense, which is number 6 in the SEC. And, you know, they're losing some guys who played quite a little bit of football for them this past season on defense. Defense is another spot where playing a lot does matter because defense, it's two things. I was going to say it's two things, talent and experience. Obviously, that applies for football as a whole. We talk a lot about defense, and I've mentioned it many times on the show that there's a pretty strong correlation to defensive success and recruiting rankings because of how much defense does come down to athleticism because it's a reactionary style of play. You have to react to what the team opposite of you is doing on offense, which means if you're going to handle that well, you better be a pretty good athlete. And great athletes are rated highly as recruits coming out of high school. So if you have a bunch of old guys who aren't very good athletes, probably not going to do you well on defense. However, there is a point that there's several key positions on defense where really it just comes down to, can you be in the right place at the right time to prevent the big play? Don't get burnt. Don't give up a touchdown. Don't miss tackles. Not missing tackles, I'm not saying athleticism doesn't impact these things, but understanding your assignment, understanding where you need to be on the field, and understanding the right angle to take to get to a guy and wrapping up and making a tackle, that's where experience and that's where effort comes in. And State having the experience that they do on defense is going to be big. They've got guys who have played a lot of football on this defense. You look at the linebacker room. You look at the secondary as a whole. D-line definitely needs some more experience there, but you've also got a few guys who the past couple of years have played quite a bit. There's a good bit of experience on this Bulldog defense, and that's some reason to be excited with Zach Arnett stepping in. You look at overall tackles, they're 4th in the SEC, 871 in returning tackles. That is something to look at to give you some excitement. Hey, this thing could take a step forward where this defense is going to be next season. Having that much production coming back at that position, that side of the ball, I think you've got a defense that you've got something to work with. Now, some of these other numbers with the sacks, the interceptions, passes broken up, sacks are pretty down low, 9th, which is not surprising. Interceptions down low because they haven't picked up a ton of passes. PBUs 10th. There's a few of these looking through State's roster. I don't know if the numbers fully add up correctly just yet. I feel pretty good about the snaps and the tackles overall, though, where they're at. So some of that stuff may still get adjusted moving forward. But again, snaps and tackles are the two big things I'm looking at, especially from passes broken up and interceptions. I mean, look, some of that's being in the right is kind of luck. Kelly Jones was tied for the SEC lead in pass breakups. You know what you have there. Quentin Taylor led Iowa State with pass broken up last year. But you've got a safety group that has played a ton of football. You've got a linebacker group of guys who have played a lot. That back 7 of the defense is something to be very, very excited about. And those are safety and linebacker especially. This is the great thing for State. Safety and linebacker, those are two positions where experience can sometimes outweigh raw talent because those are two spots where it is literally assignment football. Yes, being a great athlete still matters. I'm not saying it doesn't. But those are the two spots where it's about reading what you see from the offense and understanding where you need to be, go make the play. State's got guys who have done that. Now, corner, you need a big-time athlete. They've got that, Kelly Jones. And I think Quentin Taylor will be opposite of him as a good option. And then you got a couple young guys who are still some high talent ceiling guys. D-line, obviously, is where there's questions. But it's going to be as experienced a D-line room as they've had in a long time, for what it's worth. You know, I know he's battled injuries, but Will Whitson's played a lot of football. Trevion Williams has played a lot of football at this point. Calvin Dinkins finally got to have a full season. Dre Bledsoe's been around for quite some time now. DJ Reed got to be a part of a full season. Dalen Evans has gotten a lot of good reps at Texas A&M and is now stepping in. Jason Jenkins, not a guy I'm super excited about, but a guy that's played a lot of football. So you've got guys in that defense who have been around and are veteran players on that defensive line specifically. Now, obviously, you need raw talent. If you're just going to get knocked back off the ball, who cares, right? If you're not going to get any kind of push up front, how much does that really matter? But having guys who have played a lot now with better coaching, I think there's a chance that you get another step forward and you get solid, serviceable defensive line play. This State defense, I've said it a few times on a few pods, I'm very sneaky excited about what Mississippi State could be defensively. I'm not saying this is going to be a great group. I'm not saying they're going to be upper tier in the SEC, but I think State's got the ability defensively to take a really nice step forward. And if you get solid production out of the offense and you take a big step forward on defense, it could be a fun year. You know, Solid Verbal podcast, something I believe Dan Rubenstein on the show always talks about is something he always looks for is the combination of quarterback and defense for teams that he's interested in. Do you have a special guy at quarterback? Do you have a defense that can make a lot of plays? And look, State's got questions both, right? We're super excited about Kamario, but you've not seen him as the full-time guy. The defense could take a step forward, but they got a long way to go. But the potential is there for that combination to come together. So I think the returning experience back on defense is a really good thing to be excited about. If you pair that with a transcendent QB, there's a chance for an exciting season. So we'll see how that all works out for State. And get this back adjusted here to close out the show. But yeah, State's not in a great place returning production-wise offensively. O-line specifically has to get figured out. But I think the skill talent is there. I'm excited about Kamario. Defense having the experience back, though, that they do is something to be really, really excited about. And look, for what it's worth, the O-line was horrific this past year, and State offensively, most games could still do enough to be in it. Can you do it again next year? If you get better quarterback play, that's a possibility. So I do think there's some pieces aligning for State to have a potential fun year. I think I want to wait till out of the spring. There's another thing I wanted to take a look at in kind of a theory. I've referenced the guy a million times, Ian Boyd of America's War Game. He talks about the Space Force theory for roster construction and what really matters for building teams that are going to be successful. And I think State kind of sneakily could hit a lot of the key pieces there. I want to see how they look coming out of spring, but there's potential for that to be potential for State to align on that, and I think that'd be fun to get into. Bulldog Mississippi, good evening. Hey, glad to have you here. We're about to wrap up the stream, so I hope you didn't just get in, but glad to have you here. From Will, Chambliss getting another year so ignorant, need to get Mook to sue and say he had a runny nose or something. Yeah, man. I mean, I talked about this Thursday night that my full thoughts, if genuinely there's – sorry, I just kicked the table. My bad. If you genuinely lost a year of playing for a medical reason and you had already taken a red shirt, like I don't mind giving another season and letting you have 4 years to play, 4 years of playing that you are capable of playing. That doesn't bother me. I don't mean everybody gets 4 years whether you rode the bench or not, but if you are physically fit to, if you are not physically fit to play football, I don't mind giving you another year. Now, I think I've said before, once you get that multiple years, I start being like, all right, man, kind of time to hang it up. I see your comment, Bulldog. Tonsos, though. If genuinely I don't mind, it's tonsillitis. Like, what I said Thursday night is you cannot convince me that if Ferris State thought Trinidad Chambliss was going to help them win football games in 2022, that he would still have been a medical redshirt that year, which didn't even get submitted. And I don't know why it didn't get submitted. I don't know what happened there. But the fact, like, again, he talked about I was still practicing, and they go on talking about he was snoring. Guys, like, and I have nothing against Trinidad. I actually don't. Like, I think he's a likable young man, even though he's an Ole Miss quarterback. He's a fun quarterback to watch objectively. I've said this. I enjoy watching how he plays more than some of these other guys Ole Miss has had. I'm more impressed with some of what he does at quarterback than like Jackson Dart. And I understand Dart ended up being a first-round pick and had a solid rookie year. You know, Jackson Dart's just not a guy that I've super high on as an actual QB. I think higher of Trinidad, frankly, and the way he plays the position, because I think at times he has shown more mental ability in the pocket, which is something I'm always going to look to. So I think watching the guy in college football, I mean, it's outside of the fact that it's Ole Miss, whatever. But it was time, and it was a stupid pass. It doesn't happen if it's not an Ole Miss alum judge. I think most people would have seen through the BS on this. It is what it is. Clearly that court felt that genuinely he was truly sick in 2022. Don't agree, but it is what it is. But yeah. All right. That'll do it for me tonight. Really do appreciate everyone who tuned in. If you haven't already, please leave us a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn the notification bell on so you do know when we do go live. I'll be back on Thursday for the call-in show, and I'll try to have some other topic to get into. But if you guys want to come be a part of the action, give me your thoughts on the Bulldogs. I want to talk a little bit about Bulldog baseball from the first weekend. I got to watch the first game. Did not get to watch anything on Saturday. I was just too busy throughout the day. But want to talk a little Bulldog baseball going into their upcoming series. I guess whatever happens in the midweek, if you want to talk about that, we can certainly do that as well. Appreciate everybody. And as always, swing your sword and Hail State.